Aloha. Welcome to Light Drama Action. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe. And let's get to the content for today. Peace.
Before we begin, I want to offer a clear and firm warning. What you are about to hear contains graphic descriptions. These are not dramatizations, but actual testimony given under oath. This content is intended for mature audiences only. Listener discretion is strongly advised. And remember, all individuals mentioned in this video, including Mr. Combs, are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. If you're joining us for the first time, full summaries for days 1 through 16 are available on the video tab of this channel. Day 17, witness showdowns and chilling revelations in Sean Diddy Combs trial. Manhattan, in a tense federal courtroom on Thursday, day 17 of Sean Diddy Combs trial. 3 key witnesses took the stand, each shining a light on different facets of the prosecution's case against the 55-year-old music mogul. Bryana Bongolan, a close friend of Combs' ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura, faced blistering cross-examination about an alleged balcony incident. Enrique Santos, a veteran digital forensics analyst, painstakingly detailed how he retrieved deleted data from Cassie's old iPhones to corroborate abuse allegations. And in perhaps the most heart-wrenching turn, a woman testifying under the pseudonym Jane gave a wrenching account of her secret relationship with Combs, describing how a fairy tale romance devolved into a nightmare of drugs, coerced sex, freak-offs, emotional manipulation, and financial control. All the while, an admonition from Judge Arun Subramanian hung in the air, a stern warning to Combs after a breach of courtroom decorum that underscored the high stakes and high tensions of this trial. Combs, dressed in a dark suit, quietly flanked by his defense team, has pleaded not guilty to an array of charges, including racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Prosecutors allege that the Bad Boy Records founder ran his entertainment empire as a criminal enterprise that enabled and concealed the sexual abuse of women over 2 decades. If convicted on all counts, the Grammy-winning entrepreneur faces a possible sentence of 15 years to life in prison. With so much on the line, the courtroom drama has only intensified. Thursday's proceedings provided a microcosm of the trial's central conflict, accusers delivering graphic, emotionally charged testimony of abuse and exploitation versus a defense determined to cast doubt on their credibility and reframe their narratives as consensual, if unconventional, relationships. The atmosphere in the courtroom was electric and often somber, as each revelation landed with palpable weight. Cross-examination of Bryana Bongolan. The morning session opened with Bryana Bongolan back on the witness stand, bracing for a second day of cross-examination. Bongolan, a 30-year-old graphic designer with shoulder-length dark hair and a resolute gaze, had testified the day before that Combs assaulted her in a terrifying incident in 2016. She claimed that a furious Combs grabbed her by the neck and dangled her over the edge of a 17th floor balcony at Cassie Ventura's Los Angeles apartment, holding her life literally in his hands for 10 to 15 seconds. On direct examination, Bongolan described being terrified during the attack and said the trauma left her with lasting nightmares. For months afterwards, she would wake up screaming at night, reliving the sensation of being suspended in midair. She also recounted witnessing Combs' violent behavior toward Cassie during their long, tumultuous relationship. Now, it was the defense's turn to poke holes in her story. Facing defense attorney Nicole Westmoreland across the courtroom, Bongolan sat upright, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Westmoreland's tone was cool but pointed as she launched into a meticulous challenge of Bongolan's credibility and timeline. With surgical precision, the attorney confronted Bongolan with evidence suggesting that the alleged balcony incident could not have occurred when or even how she remembered it. Westmoreland first focused on dates and locations. Ms. Bongolan, you testified this happened in September 2016. Were you aware that Mr. Combs was in New York on September 26, 2016? She asked, arching an eyebrow. Bongolan looked momentarily caught off guard. No, she admitted softly. The lawyer projected a hotel receipt on the courtroom screen, a receipt from Manhattan's Trump International Hotel. made out to a Frank Black, a known alias Combs uses to travel incognito. The document showed an arrival date of September 24, 2016, and a checkout on September 29, with room service charges in New York on the 25th, 26th, and 27th. So if Mr. Combs was still in New York on those dates, he couldn't be in Los Angeles hurting you at the same time, correct? Westmoreland pressed, her voice coolly confident. Bongolan frowned and shifted in the witness chair. You agree one person can't be in two places at the same time, the lawyer said, hammering the point. Bongolan hesitated, a flicker of frustration crossing her face. In theory, yeah. It's hard to answer that one, she finally responded, her voice caught between confusion and defiance. A few jurors glanced up from their notepads at that answer. Sensing weakness, Westmoreland continued, challenging the timeline of Bongolan's injuries. The defense displayed a photograph that Bongolan had provided to prosecutors, a photo of bruises on her leg, which she claimed were inflicted when Combs allegedly hurled her on the furniture immediately after the balcony scare. Crucially, this photo's metadata was timestamped September 26, 2016, a date when, according to the hotel records, Combs was on the East Coast. Mr. Combs did not cause you the injuries we saw in that photo taken on September 26, correct? Westmoreland asserted, her tone sharpening. Bongolan stared at the blown-up image of her bruised thigh, the color drained from her face. I can't agree with that, she said firmly. She conceded that she wasn't sure of the exact date of the assault. It was a while ago, Bongolan sighed, but she steadfastly rejected the implication that it never happened. Prosecutor Madison Smizer on redirect later asked pointedly, regardless of the exact date, do you have any doubt that Mr. Combs held you up on that balcony? I have no doubt, Bongolan replied, her voice cracking with emotion. I will never forget him holding me on that balcony. Westmoreland next homed in on inconsistencies and Bongolan's behavior after the incident, suggesting that if Combs truly terrorized her, she wouldn't have continued to associate with him socially. Under the defense's probing, Bongolan acknowledged some uncomfortable facts. Just days after the alleged balcony assault, she remained in Combs' orbit. In the weeks following September 2016, Bongolan sent Cassie a friendly text asking if she could get Combs a particular designer hoodie he liked, an innocuous favor that, to the defense, suggested Bongolan wasn't actually fearful of the man she now accuses. Bongolan also admitted that within a week of the incident, she attended one of Combs' concerts and even went to an after-party he hosted. Westmoreland seized on this. You weren't too fearful to not go to Mr. Combs' event, were you? The attorney's voice dripped with skepticism. Bongolan paused, then answered, I always had a feeling inside, but yes, I went. She explained that she tried to play it cool with Combs after the attack, perhaps out of self-preservation or denial, but internally she remained afraid and kept her distance whenever possible. The defense wasn't done. Westmoreland gently but pointedly reminded the jury that Bongolan was a habitual drug user at the time, implying her memory might be clouded or her judgment compromised. Bongolan bristled at the insinuation. She admitted she smoked marijuana on occasion with Combs, including not long after the balcony incident, but flatly denied being high during the assault itself. Then came a hint of scandal aimed at motive. Bongolan currently has a pending lawsuit against Combs seeking damages for this very incident. Westmoreland suggested a financial incentive was at play. Did you see Mr. Combs as your opportunity to become a millionaire? She asked coolly. Bongolan narrowed her eyes. I can't agree with that, she shot back, echoing her earlier words. She insisted she sued Combs because I care about justice. Throughout this exchange, Bongolan's demeanor oscillated between composure and flashes of anger. Dressed in a charcoal blazer, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, she maintained a steady gaze at the defense attorney, only occasionally glancing toward the jury to implore them with her eyes. At one point, Westmoreland highlighted that an attorney Bongolan originally hired had included erroneous claims in a complaint, such as an allegation that Combs had bruised Bongolan's breast during the balcony altercation, a detail Bongolan now says was incorrect and the result of her former lawyer's embellishment. Bongolan acknowledged firing that lawyer and clarified that While minor details might have been mistaken, the core truth of her story remained unchanged. By late morning, Westmoreland wrapped up her cross-examination, having delivered the defense's clear message: Bongolan's account is unreliable, muddled by drugs, trauma, possible greed, and provably wrong on timing. Bongolan, on the other hand, left the stand unshaken on her central claim that a rage-fueled Sean Combs nearly killed her that night in Los Angeles. As she stepped down, she locked eyes briefly with Combs at the defense table. Combs, who had watched her intently with a clenched jaw throughout her testimony, gave a slight shake of his head, as if in disbelief. It was an ominous prelude to what happened next. Tension spiked at the midday break when Judge Aaron Subramanian suddenly called the attorneys to the bench, sending jurors off to lunch. The usually composed federal judge had a stern look on his face. In a hushed but firm voice that nonetheless carried through the silent courtroom, Judge Subramanian delivered a sharp rebuke to the defense team and to Combs himself. Combs had been observed attempting to communicate with the jury through body language during Bongolan's testimony. "I have been very clear," the judge admonished. "There are to be absolutely no interactions or even facial expressions toward the jury." He revealed that he saw Combs nodding vigorously while making eye contact with jurors during a key moment in Westmoreland's cross-examination, essentially a silent commentary on the witnesses' answers. Even during a sidebar discussion among lawyers, Combs had continued glancing at the jury and nodding in agreement with his attorney's line of questioning, the judge noted. In Subramanian's courtroom, such behavior is strictly verboten. As he spoke, Judge Subramanian, a trim, no-nonsense man in his 40s, fixed Combs with an unsmiling stare. Combs, normally confident, appeared chastened. He sat very still, shoulders squared, hands clasped in front of him on the defense table. His lead attorney, Mark Agnifilo, stepped forward to address the court, nodding respectfully. Agnifilo apologized on his client's behalf and assured the judge it would not happen again. But Judge Subramanian didn't stop there. He warned that if Combs attempted any such gesture again, the court would take drastic action. "If I catch Mr. Combs doing it even once more," the judge said sternly, "I will have the government propose a curative instruction to the jury, which you don't want, or I will remove Mr. Combs from the courtroom." A few spectators gasped softly. The notion of excluding a defendant, especially a celebrity of Combs' stature, is almost unheard of in a trial of this magnitude. Combs' jaw tensed and he inclined his head in a subtle nod, a careful, respectful nod this time to signal his understanding. "It won't happen again, Your Honor," Agnifilo reiterated. Satisfied but still stern, Judge Subramanian gave a curt nod and broke for lunch. It was a rare glimpse of Sean Combs being personally dressed down in a public forum, and it underscored the trial's tension. Even as a high-powered figure used to commanding attention, Combs was reminded he is just another defendant in this courtroom, bound by rules, and under the watchful eye of a judge who won't tolerate any attempts, however subtle, to sway the jury outside the evidence. Court observers noted that after the lunch break, Combs' demeanor was noticeably subdued. The music mogul kept his face impassive and avoided even looking toward the jury box, as if the invisible leash around him had been pulled taut. Digital evidence. Forensic analyst reveals deleted messages. After lunch, the prosecution pivoted to hard evidence, calling Enrique Santos to the stand. In contrast to the emotional fireworks of the morning, Santos' testimony was methodical and technical, yet it added crucial corroboration to the accuser's stories. Santos is a senior digital forensics analyst with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan, a man who has devoted 17 years to extracting secrets from cell phones in criminal investigations. Trim-bearded and wearing a conservative suit, he spoke in the precise, slightly formal cadence of a career expert witness. The jurors leaned in as Santos explained how he performed a complete extraction of data from 3 iPhones that once belonged to Cassie Ventura, Combs' longtime ex, whose allegations of abuse underpin much of the government's case. In calm detail, Santos described connecting Cassie's phones to specialized equipment and bypassing their encryption to pull out every bit of information stored inside. The devices, he noted, were in generally fine shape, a few cracked screens, but nothing that impeded data recovery. One phone had been repaired previously, but that didn't affect the outcome. He emphasized that his team achieved the most complete form of extraction available, essentially creating digital clones of the phone's contents. Deleted text messages, WhatsApp chats, photos, emails, all of it could be resurrected, Santos testified. Just because a file is marked deleted doesn't mean it goes away, he explained for the jury. In fact, many messages that Cassie had apparently erased from her devices were still recoverable from the deep memory. Santos's testimony felt like a forensic detective's, walking the jury through the unseen digital trail of an alleged crime. The significance of this became clear as prosecutors introduced damning messages uncovered from Cassie's phones. In one key sequence, Santos helped authenticate a WhatsApp conversation dated September 30th, 2016 between Cassie and her then Chief of Staff, Christina KK Coram. Instead of simply summarizing, Assistant U.S. Attorney Madison Smizer carefully read the text aloud with courtroom monitors turned off to the public to avoid exposing any sensitive details. In the text, Cassie confided her alarm, writing, "I have to stay away." The timestamp and metadata showed that Cassie sent this message on September 30th, 2016, just after 11 a.m. For the jury, it was a striking piece of contemporaneous evidence. Cassie had effectively reported the balcony incident in real time to a colleague, though it also introduced a subtle discrepancy. The text was sent on September 30th, whereas the defense's timeline and Bongolan's photo suggested the altercation might have occurred a few days earlier. Still, the overall narrative remained intact. Around the end of that September, something horrifying happened between Combs. The jurors scribbled notes furiously. Bongolan's credibility may have been under attack, but here was Cassie, in her own words from 2016, independently corroborating that Combs had abused her friend. No witness was on the stand as these messages were read into evidence. Santos had done his part by verifying the data, yet the effect was powerful. The courtroom was pin-drop quiet, save for the scratch of pens on notepads and the steady voice of the prosecutor reading Cassie's anguished words. Combs stared down at his hands during the reading, betraying no reaction. On the defense bench, Nicole Westmoreland pursed her lips tightly. Her cross-examination had hammered the theme that Combs wasn't in LA on the date Bongolan remembered, but now the prosecution had deftly countered with Cassie's text, implying the incident happened when Combs presumably was in town. It was a small triumph for the prosecution, digital evidence buttressing witness testimony and preempting the defense's insinuations of a fabricated story. Santos also noted an interesting quirk. In the recovered WhatsApp chats, some messages had lost their contact labels, meaning that on the forensic report, the sender or recipient names appeared blank. This can happen when messages are deleted and recovered out of context. It required prosecutors to piece together who person A or person B was in certain threads, but Santos's credibility was solid. He testified he noticed no errors in the extraction process. With the key text messages successfully presented, the forensic analyst's job was done. He stepped down after a short stint on the stand, having given the jury a factual scaffold on which to hang the harrowing anecdotes from witnesses. Jane. By mid-afternoon, it was time for the day's marquee witness, a woman whose real name was shielded from the public for her safety and privacy. The court knows her only as Jane, and her testimony marked a pivotal moment in the trial. Jane is a former girlfriend of Sean Combs, and her account in many ways mirrors Cassie Ventura's, but with a twist of its own. If Cassie's alleged abuse took place at the height of Combs' fame in the 2000s and 2010s, Jane's story unfolds more recently, from 2020 up until Combs' arrest in 2024, suggesting that the patterns of abuse did not stop with Cassie's departure but continued into the present decade. Before Jane entered, Judge Subramanian took measures to protect her identity and emotional well-being. Courtroom TV monitors, which typically display exhibits to the gallery, were turned off during sensitive portions of her testimony. Spectators were forbidden from describing Jane's appearance or any distinguishing features in their reports. The tension was palpable as the door at the side of the courtroom opened and Jane walked to the stand escorted by a U.S. Marshal. She was sworn in behind a semi-opaque screen that shielded her from public view. Only the judge, jury, and lawyers could see her clearly. The rest of us caught a silhouette at most. Speaking softly at first, Jane introduced herself as a single mother and an entrepreneur. In a steady voice, she recounted how she first crossed paths with Sean Combs. It was late 2020, she said, on a trip to Miami. At the time, Combs was actually dating one of Jane's close friends, and Jane joined them on what was supposed to be a fun getaway at Combs' invitation. She recalled the trip with a slight nostalgic smile. Sun-soaked parties, celebrity-studded events, and Combs playing the generous host. Unbeknownst to her, Combs had taken a keen interest in her. "My friend thought something was going on between me and Sean," Jane testified, and she wasn't wrong. When his relationship with her friend fell apart a few months later, Combs began pursuing Jane in earnest. By January 2021, Jane found herself flying back to Miami at Combs' invitation, this time for her and Sean to spend time together one-on-one. Jane's voice grew warm as she described their first official date in January 2021, an experience she likened to a whirlwind romance. Combs arranged a plush hotel suite with panoramic ocean views. "I remember when I first saw Sean, he walks in the door of the hotel room and he was just larger than life," Jane said, a note of rueful fondness creeping into her tone. She testified that they spent that entire week together. "Our first date lasted 5 days," she said, eliciting a few raised eyebrows in the jury box. "They talked for hours, watched the sunrise over the balcony, made love multiple times a day, and dined at exclusive restaurants when they ventured out." Jane, who was in her late 20s at the time, admitted she was swiftly swept off her feet. "On my flight home," she said softly, "I was pretty head over heels for Sean already." Yet even in those blissful early days, there were signs of the unorthodox arrangement to come. Jane testified that Combs made it clear from the beginning that he was seeing other women and that their relationship would be open on his end, an admission that stung her, but which she accepted. "He told me he really liked me," she said, "but he wasn't going to be monogamous." Jane agreed to continue seeing him under those terms. "In my heart, I just wanted to see Sean," she confessed, "so I was monogamous on my side." This compromise, her fidelity in exchange for his attention whenever he chose to give it, set the stage for a dynamic that Combs, according to prosecutors, would exploit. As their relationship progressed into February and March 2021, the tone began to shift. Jane testified that Combs quickly introduced drugs into their encounters. Previously, Jane said she had used drugs only a couple of times in her life and only MDMA, ecstasy. With Combs, however, drug use became a constant. "We would use drugs every time we saw each other," she testified matter-of-factly. Combs allegedly provided her with a pharmacopoeia of party drugs, ecstasy, also known as Molly, which made her feel euphoric, sensual, and uninhibited, cocaine, which kept her alert and energized through Combs' all-night parties, and ketamine, a dissociative anesthetic which she said made her feel not so good, why woozy and numb. Often, these substances were combined. Jane described, for instance, being given ecstasy capsules to swallow before sex, and at other times having lines of cocaine laid out by Combs for them to snort together. It got to a point, she said, that without some chemical assistance, she didn't feel she could keep up with Combs' intense sexual appetites. Jane's voice trembled slightly as she recounted the next development. What started as a glamorous, if unconventional romance quickly turned into a series of forced and paid sexual encounters. She testified, Combs gradually steered their sex life into much darker waters, a secret world he called freak-offs or sometimes hotel nights. The concept was both simple and depraved. Combs would arrange for other men to join in sexual activities with Jane while he watched, directed, and recorded the encounters for his own pleasure. Jane told the jury how Combs first broached the idea during a private meetup in mid-2021. They had been holed up together in a hotel suite for half a day, high on ecstasy, watching pornographic videos on a big screen TV. As they lounge in a tangle of silk sheets and pillows with explicit images flickering in front of them, Combs turned to her and asked if she would be open to sleeping with other men. Jane paused on the stand, her hands twisting nervously. "I said yes," she admitted. At the time, she was eager to please him and perhaps curious. She thought maybe it was just a fantasy discussion to spice things up. She was wrong. Combs intended to make it a reality. The prosecution asked Jane to describe her first freak-off experience, and a visible shudder went through her. She took a sip of water, visibly steeling herself. "It was May 2021, she began. Combs told her he had a special night planned at a luxury hotel in New York. When she arrived, he had already prepared the suite. Low red lighting casting shadows across the room, slow bass-heavy music thumping in the background, and bottles of baby oil, dozens of them, lined up on the nightstand. Jane noted that Combs had a fetish for baby oil. He would drench their bodies in it during sex. On some marathon nights, they went through 24 bottles of baby oil, leaving the sheets and even the floor dangerously slick. On this particular night, Combs handed Jane a silk robe and a dose of Molly, instructing her to relax. She sensed something unusual was about to happen when Combs announced a friend would be joining them. That friend turned out to be a man she'd never met. Jane swallowed hard and continued, "I got a sense that Sean knew the man he invited over. He called him Don." It was only later that Jane learned Don was from an escort service called Cowboys and Angels. In other words, Combs had hired a male sex worker to participate in their encounter. As Dawn arrived, Jane sat nervously on the couch in her robe, already feeling the drug warm her blood and loosen her nerves. Combs, who was casually dressed in just his bathrobe and gold chains, poured everyone drinks and kept telling Jane, "Just relax, it's all good." When the moment came, Combs dimmed the lights even further and put on a new playlist, pulsing erotic music that matched his heavy breathing. Then he made a request. He asked Jane to stand up and dance for him and the other man. Blushing with embarrassment and adrenaline, Jane complied. As she moved, swaying to the music, Don began undressing. Jane recalled the surreal sight of this stranger, chiseled and muscular, stripping down to nothing but his underwear in front of her. She felt a knot of dread in her stomach. Don came over and sat next to me, Jane testified. He started touching her leg gently, which made her skin crawl with discomfort. She knew Combs was watching intently. "I remember looking at Sean. He was watching us and touching himself," she said quietly. Indeed, Combs had disrobed completely and was seated across from them, masturbating as he observed his girlfriend and the escort. Jane's voice faltered for a moment. The prosecutor asked if she needed a break, but Jane pressed on. She described how things escalated. Don began to have sexual contact with her. Jane reciprocated mechanically, kissing him, allowing him to caress her, eventually engaging in foreplay and oral sex, all while Combs directed the scene. "He was in a positive mood, being encouraging and sweet," Jane said of Combs. He murmured praise to her, saying how hot it was, urging her to continue. At one point, Combs actually gave verbal instructions. Jane followed along despite her inner revulsion because she didn't want to disappoint him. She testified that as things got hot and heavy, her mind detached. Jane's testimony revealed that what was once an occasional deviance soon became a regular expectation. The frequency of these hotel nights increased drastically. Combs had effectively initiated Jane into a disturbing routine. Every few weeks, sometimes more often, he would summon her, often flying her to wherever he was, Miami, New York, Los Angeles, Atlanta, wherever business took him, and orchestrate similar multi-hour or even multi-day sexual marathons with one or more male escorts involved. Jane described these sessions in excruciating detail. They often lasted anywhere from 24 to 36 hours straight, during which she was not allowed to sleep. "I would sometimes have sex with more than one person during a hotel night," she explained, clarifying that Combs sometimes brought in multiple men over the course of a single session, hence the frequent use of cocaine to stay awake and ecstasy to blunt her inhibitions. The baby oil was always present, turning their hotel suites into literal slip and slide orgies. There was often a video camera set up or Combs' iPhone recording parts of the encounter. He liked to watch the footage later, she said, and sometimes even showed her clips as if expecting praise for how sexy it was. Jane described lying in bed afterward, battered and exhausted. She told the jury that after some months of this, she began to protest. By the end of 2021, the novelty had given way to a nightmare she could no longer deny. She told Combs she didn't want to have sex with other men anymore. Upon hearing this, Combs grew cold and dismissive. He did not react with anger or physical force, but with something that to Jane felt just as controlling. He would sulk, give her the silent treatment, or imply that she was failing him. The tension would build, she said, whenever she attempted to set that boundary. From the very beginning of their relationship, Combs had showered Jane with financial largesse. He paid the rent on her apartment. She lived in New York City, and he covered a luxury building she could never have afforded alone. He paid all her bills, from utilities to credit cards. He gave me money here and there, just because, Jane testified. At first, it felt like a fairy tale, a struggling single mom suddenly having all her expenses magically handled by a wealthy benefactor. But that money came with invisible strings. I felt obligated to perform these nights with him, Jane said, her voice now thick with emotion, because of everything he was doing for me. When she tried to pull away from the freak-offs, Combs yanked those strings hard. On one occasion, after she voiced reluctance to continue, he flat out threatened to stop paying her rent. The implication was crystal clear: if she didn't continue pleasing him on his terms, all the financial support keeping her afloat could vanish. For Jane, who had a young child to support, that threat was terrifying. It trapped her deeper in the cycle. I felt trapped, she said, searching for words. Frustrated and obligated. I was in too deep. At this admission, Jane's composure visibly cracked. She took a long pause, closing her eyes and breathing carefully to fend off sobs. The judge allowed her a moment. Jurors shifted in their seats. Some looked down, as if granting her a modicum of privacy in a very public forum. Combs sat motionless, his face unreadable, but his fingers tapped nervously on the table. One of his attorneys leaned in to whisper to him, and he gave a faint nod. Regaining her composure, Jane continued with her narrative. She explained that she essentially became a full-time captive of Combs' whims. She stopped working entirely. It was impossible to hold a normal job when at any moment she might have to fly out to meet him. She arranged for constant childcare, keeping her young child with relatives or nannies at a moment's notice whenever Combs summoned her to a different city. Her entire life revolved around those unpredictable calls and texts from Combs, like a soldier on standby, the prosecutor suggested. Jane agreed. Yes, exactly. I was on standby for him. He paid all my bills, and I felt I owed him whatever he asked, even things I hated. Over years, this twisted relationship had ebbs and flows. Jane mentioned they took 2 significant breaks. The first break in the relationship was brief. She didn't specify the date, but implied it lasted only a few weeks or months before Combs charmed his way back into her life. The second break was later, from October 2023 to February 2024, a 4-month separation. That period coincides notably with heightened public scrutiny of Combs as other allegations surfaced. Jane said she tried to reclaim her life during those breaks, but each time, Combs managed to reel her back in with apologies, money, and promises. The cycle resumed until finally, in mid-2024, it came to a jarring end. Combs was arrested on the current charges in September 2024. Only then, Jane testified, did she break free of his grip, and even then, the psychological hold took time to unravel. Throughout Jane's testimony, the courtroom atmosphere was mesmerized and grim. The prosecutors and defense attorneys alike mostly stayed quiet, letting her narrative unfold in full. Assistant U.S. Attorney Maureen Comey, who led Jane's direct examination, guided her with gentle prompts and an occasional supportive nod. Comey's questions were open-ended. What happened next? How did that make you feel? Allowing Jane to speak in her own words. When Jane struggled or became emotional, Comey rephrased or patiently waited, striking a careful balance between drawing out details and not re-traumatizing the witness overtly. On the other side, the defense team watched intently. At times, Combs' attorneys exchanged glances or whispered, perhaps noting points to attack in cross-examination. but they refrained from objecting. After nearly 2 hours of continuous testimony, Jane's voice was hoarse and her face flushed. The prosecutor tenderly asked one final question. "Jane, why are you testifying here today under these circumstances?" Jane looked toward the jury, tears welling again. "Because," she said, "I don't want anyone else to go through what I went through. I need people to know what he did." That simple statement seemed to echo in the silent hall. When it was finally time for the court to adjourn for the day, Jane stepped down from the stand. A profound hush fell over the courtroom. The usual clatter of shifting chairs and murmured conversations as jurors file out was conspicuously absent. Jurors rose slowly from their seats, many of them still staring at Jane or at Combs, as if absorbing what they had just heard. Even the lawyers at both tables remained unusually still and quiet. One by one, the jurors exited, and only then did the spectators begin to stir, whispering in hushed tones. Jane's testimony had cast a spell of solemn silence, a rare moment in any trial, let alone one as high profile and contentious as this.